Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Austin, and this is Creating a Global Connection Plan with an Equity Lens. Let's dig in. So, here's what I want to talk about in this video. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of information about my background. Every time I hear somebody present on any topic, I love knowing what their background is because I feel like it can just help me understand what their angle is. Next, we're going to talk about my journey in creating a global connection plan and what that could look like for you. And we'll talk a little bit about how to deal with naysayers, but we're not going to spend too much time on them because they're not as important as the global connection plan itself. And then we'll talk about how do we create globally competent teachers, so us. And I'll give you a little bit of information at the end on how to contact me if you have questions. So one thing before we start is I want to say something I never say to my students. Please have your phones nearby. There are going to be a lot of QR codes on the screen, and I want you to engage with the material. So use those QR codes, use your cameras, check out the different websites and resources that I give you as we go along. My goal here is that everybody watching this video will walk away with at least one new thing that they can try that they think will fit their context and go toward their own global connection plan. So here's a little bit about my background. But I think what's really important is to start with what I like to call my spark story. So what gave me that spark to become a world language teacher? I'm a French teacher, and I think that spark really happened for me when I took my very first trip to Paris when I was 19 years old. I was a freshman in college, and my college had a 4-1-4 calendar. So a 4-month semester and a 1-month J term, and then another 4-month semester. And I spent my J term back with my mentor, a woman who was just one of the most remarkable teachers I've ever had. She was my middle school French teacher. So I went back and I was an aide in her classroom. And she and I discovered that January that we had the exact same spring break, and we found a flight to Paris round trip for, it was, I think, about $240. So I had told her I've never been there, and I was so excited at the thought of going. And she's like, we're going. The two of us were going. So I spent January through mid-March, just completely walking on air, so thrilled. I was going to go to Paris. And then 3 or 4 days before the trip, my boyfriend broke up with me again. This time because he didn't get into Harvard. And so a few days before the trip, I thought, oh my gosh, I am going to the city of love, freshly dumped. Oh no, like this, everything that I was so excited about suddenly just plummeted. I thought, I cannot go to the city of love freshly dumped. This is just not going to go well. But at the same time, putting an Atlantic-sized distance between me and him seemed like a great idea. So I ended up going to Paris, and it only took just setting foot in that city to forget about that whole week. It was absolutely magical to me. I was a French and art double major in Paris. And so at that point, I was like, this is it. This is what I know I'm meant to do. I love this place, and it absolutely changed me. So I came back, finished college, and started teaching. And then over the years, I started getting increasingly into global education, which is a lot about what I'm going to present today, because global education allows students more than any other form of education to get that spark too. I know what that did for me. And so many of you watching know what it did for you. Maybe it was travel for you, or maybe it was a connection to a country of your birth or a country of your heritage. But there was a spark. And so I think what a global connection plan can do and what global education can do is create a spark in students. So I started teaching in 2002. I led my first student trip abroad in 2004 and have been doing so consistently ever since. And then in 2018, I was a global education fellow. I continued to work with global education in many capacities, but it was in 2018 when I learned about global education and when I really reframed what my goals were as a world language educator. So first, I want you to stop and think or even write about, what does global education mean to you? And why is this work important for kids? So right now is a great time to pause the video and jot down some ideas, or take at least 60 seconds to think about it. So I'll give you time to do that now. Go. All right, welcome back. So take a look at what you wrote. And now let's compare it to what's out there for global education. So according to the Asia Society, which is one of the leaders in global ed, a globally competent student can investigate the world. So it's learning about the world and the people in it. So it's cultures, it's language, it's geography. And what I think is really key for world language teachers is that it's not just one place. It's not just, oh, I'm a Spanish teacher and I studied in Mexico, so that's what I'm going to teach about. No, it's all of the Spanish-speaking countries and the rest of the world, because it's all about how we interact globally. A globally competent student can recognize perspectives. So it's recognizing the perspectives of others in other parts of the world. It's recognizing our own perspectives, and it's recognizing what is the context that got me and others to the perspective that we have. Context is important. It's being able to communicate ideas. So it's being able to communicate them with diverse audiences. So that might sound a lot like the ACTFL goals, and it is. So we want to be able to communicate in written language, in spoken language. We want to be able to do that in multiple languages. And the biggest piece, I think, is taking action. So after we investigate the world, after we recognize that everyone has different perspectives and a context that led to those perspectives, we start to generate ideas, and then we take action with them. That action is meant simply and importantly to make the world a better place. Global education is absolutely linked to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and also with the idea of creating global competence and empathy in our students. So in 2018, as a global education fellow, I had the great opportunity to study with Dr. Fernando Reimers of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he's one of the leaders in the field of global ed. And through him, I was told something that really changed the trajectory of my teaching, and it was this statement: global education isn't just learning about the world, it's learning with and from the world. So here, this is something that really changed me, because I thought when I first heard the words global education, I was like, well, that's what we do. As a world language teacher, I'm educating globally because I'm teaching a global language. But I realized that what I and what most world language educators I know do is we do a fantastic job teaching about the world. But global education is teaching and learning with the world and from the world. That's what's key. So I decided I wanted to create what I called a global connection plan. How do I create more connections, more opportunities to learn with and from the world? So initially I thought, okay, what are my goals? I want every single one of my students, no matter what their level of language is, to interact globally, to learn with and from the world. I want them to be able to use their language skills, however novice they may be, with native speakers who live in other countries or really into our own city, just outside of our school. I wanted to increase students' global competence, their ability to interact with the rest of the world and respectfully interact and exchange ideas and take action together. And I wanted to be able to do all of those first three things equitably. How do I provide opportunities for my students who may have fewer financial means? How do I provide opportunities for students where no matter what that student's background is and who they are, they can see themselves in the curriculum? I wanted to work harder to reach all kids. So there were things that I wanted to consider. I thought, okay, I need some experiences that students lead and some that I lead, and students are more taking them in and processing. I wanted to start locally. I wanted to include national work and a global reach. I really thought a range of price points was going to be key. And one thing that I really love doing is taking things that seem expensive and figuring out a way to make them much cheaper or even free. And what I wanted to do was start with what I already had. I thought, okay, what do I have and where can I go with this? So I made a little grid and it was a little sparse because so much of what I did was teaching about the world. And here I was thinking, no, I have to consider teaching and learning with and from the world. So the initial grid, initial global connection plan, initial way to create that spark, hopefully in students, was a little light. I thought, is it equitable? No. Does it create global ready students? Well, those things help, but I don't think I was reaching enough kids. So then I thought, okay, here we go. I need to add in some more. I also understood that things that I think are a little bit more student-led, other teachers might think, no, I want to lead that, and vice versa. So I made a new grid where I kind of merged those two. The first thing that I really wanted to expand on was my hosting program. So hosting is working with a company that brings in students from other countries into your community, and you find host families for them. I generally, over the years, I have used Language and Friendship, and I love them. They're an absolutely fabulous company out of Minneapolis. They provide a range of opportunities and time frames. And what I really like about them is that their program is 3 weeks long and it's in the summer. So a lot of families think, oh, I don't know, taking in a student from another country for a whole semester, a school year, that seems really long. But when you think, oh, okay, 3 weeks in the summer, it suddenly becomes more doable for most families. AFS is a really great company as well. Their bread and butter is a little bit more longer stays, and they also send American students abroad. United Studies is another company that I think is good to explore. Take a look at all these three and really think, okay, what time frame do they have? Is it in the summer? Is it during the school year? How long is the time frame? Where do they go? Where do they go in the United States? What countries are they bringing students here from? I also think that what's super great about hosting is that it's not just one thing. It's a language and a cultural exchange. And it doesn't just benefit our students, it benefits their whole family. And I think that's really key. So often we think, oh, yeah, going global means leaving the country. And then all of a sudden we think, oh, that's really expensive. It automatically doesn't include most of our students. But when you talk about hosting, typically with reputable companies, you do not pay to do this, to host a student from another country. I always tell my students, you're providing friendship and feeding and housing the student. So for a lot of families, just one more person at the table can be doable. For a lot of families, maybe there's a guest room or a pull-out couch or bunk beds that can be used. And suddenly the idea of global becomes really local. World Language Storytime and World Language Day at the Zoo are two things that I have been involved in. World Language Storytime happens in my own community in Fort Collins, Colorado, and there's a QR code there to the library. You can absolutely contact them and they'll give you information. They have an entire program where students come in or community members come in and they read stories. So it starts with an opening song in the language. They have multiple world language story times. So opening song, then a story and an activity or some sort of movement piece, a story, activity, and movement, a third story, activity and movement, and a goodbye song and a project. So my upper level French students were able to present at Storytime and they use their language skills in the community. This is that take action piece. This is getting out, taking action, and being a part of their community in another language. It's also a great opportunity to act with native speakers and to use creativity. When I lived in Minnesota, I took my students to World Language Day at the Minnesota Zoo. And the zoo set it up so that there were multiple world language days. We went to the French Day. They would beforehand, a couple months before World Language Day, they would send me a list of the animals that my students would be in charge of. And my students made activities and presentations to go with those animals. And the zoo would say, okay, your presentation needs to include their habitat, their food sources, and a whole list of things that they wanted in the presentations. The presentations had to be in the target language. And then the day of, my students would present, but there were tons of other students there, some from immersion schools, that would come and listen to the presentations. Then the zoo also went around and they had their workers scoring the presentations, and there were awards at the end. It was fantastic. So this might not be something that you have in your area. Maybe you don't have a zoo in your area, but that's fine. It's the program. It's the idea. So you can get information from the Minnesota Zoo about their world language program and see if you can replicate that somewhere else. Could you replicate that, for instance, in an art museum or in a children's museum or in a science museum, something like that? Then the newcomer and international student panel. This is something I really, really loved because it took place in a high school that I was working in. And in this high school, there were newcomers to the United States, and there were also international students there who were studying abroad. So often in so many schools, newcomers and international students, English language learners, tend to be in that one little corner of the school. They don't know a ton of kids, and this is a way to make connections right in our own school. So what would happen is every single world language class would participate in the student panel, and each class is in charge of a theme. So it might be something really simple, really low level, like holidays or stereotypes or school. Or it might be something more significant. Maybe you want to talk about sustainable development goals in their home countries, or climate change in their home countries, government in their home countries. What's key is to really talk with the teacher of the English language learners and ask them, what can these students talk about? What do they like to talk about in English? Then each world language class creates questions together. So my French class would have a theme that was assigned to our class, and we'd create a bunch of questions, and we would have one student as our speaker. One of the teachers would reserve the auditorium for the day, and all the world language classes would go in every single period. We did this. And my world language class, we would send our speaker up on stage. Every world language class would send their elected speaker up on stage. Then the world language speakers, class speakers, and the newcomers and international students would alternate on stage. And the international students would have a sign in front of them. It would say their name and their home country. And the world language class speakers would pass the mic around and just alternate asking questions. And the newcomers and international students would answer the questions in English. The whole audience, which are all the world language classes, has a handout where they are filling in answers. They are profiling 3 or 4 of the newcomers, the international students, and they'll write about them. And then you can turn that into a project when they're writing in the target language. There's a lot of different things you could do with it. But this is appropriate for world language classes, for history classes, for English classes. It's great to get all sorts of classes into the auditorium, listening to the newcomers and international students. And it's pretty special for them because they really get a chance to shine while practicing their English. And they meet people. And so the topics, can be really surface level, and I think that's okay. And that tends to be a really good start for English language learners. The next thing is having pen pals. ePals is a great website that you can use, but you can also go on Facebook. There is a group called French American Pen Pals, if you're a French teacher. And you can go there, and there's people looking for pen pals in Francophone countries and in the US, and they just hook up through this group. ePals, you can create a free account and find classrooms to work with all over the world. What I like to do is find a classroom and then work off of ePals. Maybe you can use Flipgrid and send videos back and forth. You can use pen and paper and send snail mail, or you can use pen and paper and then scan all the letters into one PDF document and just email that document to a teacher in, say, Colombia. And the teacher in Colombia prints out that document and hands out the pen pal letters to their students. Window swap is a super fantastic tool. People all over the world have uploaded a few minutes of looking out their window. So what I like to do is use this the first few minutes in class, and I provide sentence starters for my students, and they look at the window and they start by describing it. I see, there is, that's a, and using basic descriptive language. I do it with my lower level students. Then they go into things like, I wonder, or I think that, or there might be. And they all have about 2 minutes at the beginning of every class to discuss what they see on that window with their table mates. Then we all guess, okay, where is this window? And then I'll show them where the window is. And it's not always a Francophone country. In fact, more often than not, it isn't. But it's looking into the window, quite realistically, of someone around the world and seeing what's their view. What is it like there? And seeing, wow, there's a lot that's similar. Empatico is a super fantastic website. It's only for elementary grades, but it allows teachers to work with other teachers and classrooms around the globe. Empatico has a ton of different projects already set up, and you can choose to work on a project that they set up, or you and your cooperating teacher can create a project together. So, for example, maybe a fifth grade classroom in the United States at a Spanish immersion elementary school could partner with a classroom in Peru, and maybe they do water testing in their area and work with science classes to figure out, okay, what's the water quality? Where is it good? Where is it bad? Why might that be so? What could we do to take action and make it better? And students in both classrooms can collaborate and talk about how they make progress in their respective locations. I think it's really important to encourage kids to continue their study of world languages. So I'm in a high school at the moment, and it is really easy with technology now to create scholarship funds. So using things like online tools like GoFundMe to create pots of money. Now, the issue is this. Very often, if you were to send out something saying, hey, we're setting up this scholarship fund, please donate, people who and families who don't have as much money are automatically often going to not donate. It tends to be a situation of often thinking, you know what, that's for people with a lot of money. That's not me. So I'm a really big believer in asking for micro donations because it levels the playing field and allows more people to participate and more people to feel part of the community. So you raise money for continued study in world language. And what you can do is say, put out on the school newsletter, on a website, on individual emails to families. You can say, we have a $1 campaign going on. We would like everybody who can to donate $1 to this scholarship fund. When it's low, that takes away some of the barriers to entry. So people feel like they can participate even if they don't have a lot. And people who have more often will be like, oh, okay, $1? Well, that's great, but I'll give 20. So asking for a lower amount often helps to create more community, more buy-in, and more engagement. Sustainable development goals. So the United Nations set up the Sustainable Development Goals as a way to work toward a better world together. So what I like to do in my units, I recognize I'm really lucky. I teach in a context where I don't have to follow any certain textbook. As long as I am hitting the benchmarks set by my district and state, it doesn't matter how I get there. So I set up my own units where every single unit, we have a different Francophone country that we focus on and different projects, grammatical points, vocabulary I'm trying to hit. And in those units, when we talk about these different countries in conjunction with the Sustainable Development Goal, it's important to ask questions like, how are we similar? How are we different? How are we interconnected and interdependent? What does this country do well with this Sustainable Development Goal? And where can the U.S. learn from them? And where does this country struggle with that particular development goal? And how can we potentially provide an example that might work in their context? So what does this look like? I set up a little grid like this. So every unit, I have a sustainable development goal, at least one Francophone country that I focus on, vocabulary, grammar, verbs I want to embed. And it doesn't matter if you teach vocabulary, grammar, and verbs explicitly or more implicitly. It's like, okay, what do I want to hit? Doesn't matter how, everybody's going to do it differently. I really like having projects and like tying novels or readers or films to each unit. So here's an example. Sustainable development goal number 4 is quality education. So I'm focusing on a few different Francophone countries because one thing I do is we look at school schedules. So we look at individual, like a student schedule, but also a calendar. What does a school year calendar look like in various Francophone countries? We also, in our unit where we talk about food, is we talk about what does a school lunch menu look like in a bunch of different Francophone countries. So that really ties into food scarcity and the SDG that goes with that. Next, we are coming into ideas that might have a little bit bigger initial cost, but also you can do those micro donations and try to create scholarships, full or partial, to help students. Global Volunteers is an excellent organization. It's kind of like, I'm forgetting the word now. When you, it's like a study abroad a little bit, but you're not studying, you're volunteering. And the Peace Corps, that's what I was thinking of. So it's like Peace Corps Light. Peace Corps, you're signed up for a long haul. Global Volunteers is 1, 2, 3, or sometimes 4-week programs in another country, and you're volunteering there. So you are paying to go and volunteer. But again, look for ways we can get scholarships. Global Volunteers primarily works with adults, so I think it's a really great pairing for universities and different classes, not just world language, but different disciplines could really find great things that they could do with Global Volunteers all around the world. Global Leaders is a nonprofit in Fort Collins, Colorado, that works on student leadership and community service at a local level and then at a global level. So one of their main partners is in Guatemala. So students spend a whole year preparing for a trip to Guatemala, doing fundraising and doing community service in the local community in Fort Collins. Then they go to Guatemala and work there. This is a situation where it's not global leaders coming into a community and saying, okay, this is how it has to be done. Here's the way we're going to do it. No. It's the local community setting up projects and needing volunteers and taking them from wherever. So Global Volunteers students go in and, under the direction of the local community, work on a project. They also stay in host families. I think that's really key for students, and it's great for their language development. Going back to Global Volunteers, that's another thing that they do that I really believe in. It is not U.S. companies setting up shop in another country, telling people how to do things. It's other countries saying, hey, we could use some volunteers. We have a project that we set up based on our needs. Family stays. This is a really big one that I believe in very much. Here, that QR code takes you to CIEE. This is a really fantastic company. They work with high school and college students on study abroad experiences. So CIEE has a range of locations and opportunities. Some of them are world language focused, like you're going abroad and you're studying language. Others, no. Like you can study, for example, K-pop in South Korea. You can study fashion design in Paris. You can study architecture. You can study sustainable development. There's a whole lot of different things that students can choose to study. So CIEE is a great company because they have millions of dollars every year to spend in scholarships. That helps make it really equitable for students. So I have had students over the years apply for programs with CIEE. They are 1-month study abroad programs in the summer. That also helps make it more equitable because it's a summer program. There's a couple different time slots. There's some choice there, and students can pick what works best for their families. But I've had students apply and get full scholarships. So all they have to come up with is their passport and a plane ticket. The rest of it is covered for them. They live with a family. I have had students apply and get partial scholarships, 10, 20, 30, 70% scholarships. And I always tell students, just apply. You never know. And if you get a scholarship package that is big enough, great, take it, go abroad in the summer. If it's not big enough, that's fine. You can turn it down and apply again the next year. There are some great benefits for teachers too. CIEE does hire teachers to work in their global programs, but also if you have 10 students from your high school participate in the summer abroad program in any given summer, 10, CIEE will send you as their teacher to visit one of their programs for free. So you can check out one of their language programs. Virtual reality. So very often, like if you talk about taking trips abroad with virtual reality, I think one of the gut reactions from people is, well, that's not really traveling. But that's also coming from a place of privilege. That's largely coming from people understanding, probably because they've done it, that travel takes money. But not all students have money, and not all students with money can travel. Sometimes students have physical or mental disabilities that prevent some travel abroad. Sometimes there can be health issues at any given time that would prevent a trip abroad. So using virtual reality systems set up in your media center is an excellent way to make travel free. I really like using them with novels and readers. So wherever the novel or the reader takes place, I like to send students a couple at a time up to the media center where our media specialist helps them travel to different places that are in the reader and see them in what feels like 3D. Now, virtual reality systems are one of those things that you get what you pay for, and they're not cheap. You do want to invest in a good system. So again, there's that money issue. But I really think you can make it cheaper by applying for grants. So I have a QR code there for the NEA Foundation. They have grants that really would be applicable to cover the cost of these virtual reality systems. And they really like funding projects with global education. Student trips abroad. This is probably the most common thing that teachers think about, world language teachers think about when we think about getting our kids globally exposed. And it's a really high benefit, but also high cost. So you want to think about equity. How much does the trip cost? And where do you go? And how do you create a cycle that makes it more equitable? So you want to vary the length of time you're abroad. A 4-day trip is going to be cheaper in most cases than a 12-day trip. You want to vary the location. Going somewhere closer to the United States is going to be cheaper than crossing an ocean. You also want to think about where it is that you're going. How equitable is that? So in a French classroom, for example, it's not super equitable to only go to France, a country that is 80% white, when the Francophone world is so much more than that. So there are options in Senegal, there are options in Martinique. Language and Friendship, the company I talked to you about a little bit ago for hosting, they have a really excellent program bringing students to Martinique, and that program includes a family stay. This QR code is for Education First, EF Tours. It really is probably the largest student travel organization in the United States. And it's just, I've used multiple student travel companies over the years. EF is just one of them. But you can think again, can we set up a GoFundMe and use micro donations? Or one thing that I have done that is really easy to do is give a student a full scholarship. So with EF Tours, we'll just use that as our example. You get one free chaperone for every 6 paying travelers. So the first 6 paying travelers cover my trip abroad. And then the second 6 paying travelers cover a co-chaperone for me. Okay, great. So now we've got 12 students and 2 chaperones. I try to get 18 students. Then that next group of 6 students, I use instead of having another chaperone, because realistically, 2 chaperones can easily cover 18 students. That is not a safety issue. It's not a concern. So you can use that extra spot for a full scholarship for a student. If you want, you could do like a drawing. You could have an essay contest. You can set something up that is partially merit-based, partially need-based. There's a lot of different things that you could do. So now, adding those items in, looking back at the matrix I made for my global connection plan, it's important to consider that this doesn't just have to be you. It doesn't have to be me doing all of these things in this grid. Instead, it can be implemented across the department or across a whole school. So is this more equitable than what I initially had? Yes. It has more opportunities that span the globe and local. It has more opportunities that are free and have a price tag. Does it create more global ready students? Absolutely. It's providing more opportunities to interact with and learn from the world, not just from me about other places. So this is a little bit more fleshed out grid. This is what we're looking for in a global connection plan. And of course, we want to always keep adding to it. But then there's always the naysayers. There's always that guy who's got something to say about what we're doing all the time. So here's just a couple issues that I've run into. Sometimes things are like, oh, this sounds too expensive. Well, start with ideas that are free or low cost. And I always like to think, okay, for the ideas that aren't free or low cost, not can we do it, but if it's good for kids, ask how can we do it? How can we make this feasible? Sometimes you get people that are like, why are we focusing globally? This is anti-American. We need to focus on us. But then you bring up, well, 2 of our top 5 trade partners are English speaking, only 2. And one of them is only partially English speaking. That's Canada. So global readiness realistically helps fuel American capitalism. Now, I'm not saying that you have to agree that capitalism is the best way to go, But I am saying that likely people saying this is anti-American would enjoy hearing that global education can help support American capitalism and American business. But also you might want to bring up that this is a safety issue. The more we know about the world, the more we interact with the world and learn about it, the better or the safer we are because we're better prepared. We understand other countries better, we have more empathy, and the more people know each other on a personal level from different countries, the less apt we are to have violent conflict. The last piece is creating global ready teachers. So you really want to evolve where you're at with your own global competence too. So this is something that shouldn't just be a one-time thing. It needs to be something that we're continually doing, continually reaching for. And there's a ton of options, low cost and ones with some price tags. So we can take students abroad. If we take students abroad, then we can get a free trip abroad and miles that come with that. We can read. ICLS has a virtual book club that runs pretty often for world language educators. We can also apply to the Global Learning Fellowship. That's what the QR code is there for. The NEA Foundation runs this Global Learning Fellowship. It is a year-long fellowship, and it culminates in a field study in another country. When I was a Global Learning Fellow, my field study was in South Africa. And I will say that in 22 years of teaching, the Global Learning Fellowship was hands down the best professional development I've ever had, ever. It was fantastic. IRIX has a free class called Global Education 101, and that's all done online. I have done that. It's a really great introduction to global ed. And Teachers for Global Classrooms, this new QR code, that one is similar to the Global Learning Fellowship in that it's a year-long professional development, but it's in conjunction with Fulbright. And at the end, all of the fellows go to different countries and spend different lengths of time in those countries in their field studies. So it has some similar pieces with the NEA Foundation's fellowship, but also is different. Here's a QR code for the Pulitzer Center Teacher Fellowship. This is a fellowship that is actually paid. You get paid to do it. And it's all about lesser reported news stories from around the globe. National Geographic has tons of teacher courses that they continually update that are free and really well put together. I also recommend looking on social media, looking for global education groups, hashtags like hashtag global ed, follow people like Dr. Fernando Reimers, follow the Asia Society and World Savvy. The Asia Society and World Savvy on their websites, they both have a lot of information about global education as well as resources for teachers. I am a big believer in applying for grants. I think that's huge. The NEA Foundation, like I said, you could use their grants and try to get a virtual reality system. But they also have grants that would help fund, for example, more globally equitable literature for your classrooms. And then this last QR code is Facebook. There's a group called Hospitality Exchanges, and it's a lot of world language teachers from around the globe that open up their homes to people passing through. So if travel costs are prohibitive, you could think, okay, maybe I just need to get the flight, but then after that, I can stay with teachers that I met in this hospitality exchange group. Then there's more possible higher cost options, such as travel. That can be higher cost, but there's always travel hacking. That QR code there takes you to a presentation I did on how world language teachers can get abroad for free or nearly free. And there's a whole section in there about travel hacking and how to do that. The think tank on global education is with the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It is absolutely excellent and has people from all over the world that come to do it. It's a really great way to interact and network and make connections. There's also a lot of graduate programs around the country that have globally focused curriculum. So, for example, some that are focused on global competence. The Global Exploration for Educators organization, GEO, they provide trips for teachers that you still have to pay, but it's at a pretty significantly discounted rate. And there's really great trip options. Check it out on their website. The Fund for Teachers provides grants for teachers to do a lot of different things that can be, for example, global education focused. And the Qatar Foundation International provides grants for that would be applicable for anyone teaching Arabic. So let's go back to that idea of a spark. We know as world language teachers that interacting with another culture, that travel, that experiencing new places really ignited something in us. And they can for students too. That's why we need to bring in these global components into our classrooms and into our curriculum. It can create a spark for students. Sometimes, though, we're not always going to see that spark in class. The evidence might come later. And I have here, you can see a post. I tell students that after they turn 21, we can connect on social media. And they're always like, why after 21? After I graduate, I'm not going to be your student anymore. And I always tell them, yeah, that's true. But I don't want to see all the pictures that you're posting until after your 21st birthday has happened. And then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. So there's one student that connected with me after she turned 21, and she was a student that I had in my AP Art History class, and I took her on a trip that included parts of France and Italy. And the student I know had fun on the trip, but all I remember of her on this trip was that when we were in Assisi, Italy, she was in a little tourist shop and spent a considerable amount of money on jewelry that was Lord of the Rings themed. And so I thought, okay, that's fine if you want to buy Lord of the Rings jewelry in Italy. And then years later, she finds me on social media and we become linked on there, and I start to see that she's posting pictures of her traveling all over the world. And I said to her, like, this is incredible. And you can see her reply there. Once I got a taste of travel with that first trip to Europe in high school, I couldn't stop. And I had no idea that that's how she felt on that trip. So here's just an example of that spark in a student happening after graduation. So lastly, I have a book. It's called Going Global in the World Language Classroom, Ideas, Strategies, and Resources for Teaching and Learning with the World. So if anything here in this presentation sounds interesting to you, it's all in this book, only it goes into more detail and there's more ideas and strategies for you. It's available on Amazon. It's available from my publisher, Routledge. Routledge really often has sales going on. So I would check there first if you're interested in it. And if there's not a sale going on, please contact me for a discount code because I can often get them. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I am absolutely happy to answer questions if you have them. Please connect with me on socials. And thank you again. And I hope that you have been thinking about that spark for you and how you can ignite that in your students.